We dropped out of hyperspace into a dead system, and every alarm on the bridge screamed at once. I grabbed the edge of my console as the pale vigil shuddered around me, her old hull groaning against forces that should not have existed in empty space. Commander Dreth Vasan barked orders from the center chair, his mandibles clicking so fast that even I, born and raised speaking Telvari Common, could barely follow. The navigation officer, a young female named Essa, fought her controls with all four arms, while the ship tried to tear itself apart. "Stabilize the drift," Vasan ordered. "Kale, get me a scan of this system. Now." I was already working. "My name is Kale Serenthi. I am a junior xenoarchaeology officer aboard the Pale Vigil, which is a survey cruiser belonging to the Telvari Dominion." That title used to mean something. 6 months ago, the Telvari Dominion controlled 47 star systems and maintained one of the most respected fleets in the Galactic Arm. Today, I was not sure we controlled anything at all. The Hollow had seen to that. I pushed the thought away and focused on my screens. The system around us was unremarkable by any standard. A mid-sized yellow star, 8 planets in stable orbits, asteroid belts in the expected places, no active signals, no energy signatures, no life signs, nothing that should have tripped every warning system on our ship the moment we arrived. "Scans are clean," I reported, though my voice carried the confusion I felt. "Standard system, no anomalies." "Then why did our hyperdrive nearly collapse on entry?" Vasan leaned forward, his compound eyes swept across every display on the bridge. "This is the Soul Exclusion Zone. There is a reason no one has come here in 300,000 years." He was right, and we all knew it. The Soul Exclusion Zone was one of those places that every species in the galaxy agreed to avoid, not because of any specific threat, not because of any recorded danger, but because every civilization older than 50,000 years had the same entry in their archives. A single line, repeated across cultures that had never contacted each other. "Do not enter Sol." No explanation, no context, just the warning. We were here because we had nowhere else to go. The Pale Vigil had been part of a scouting fleet tasked with searching dead systems for pre-collapse weapon caches, anything that might give the Dominion a fighting chance against the Hollow. That fleet was gone now, destroyed at the Battle of Rith Crossing 3 weeks ago. We had escaped because we were small and fast, and because our captain made a decision that most commanders would not have made. He pointed us at Sol. "I need deeper scans," Vasan said. "Full spectrum, everything this ship can give me." I configured the array for maximum sensitivity and pushed the scan outward. The first sweep returned the same results. Dead rock, cold gas, empty space. I was about to report nothing new when the second sweep came back, and the numbers on my screen stopped making sense. "Commander," my throat went dry, "I am getting metallic signatures inside the asteroids." "Ore deposits?" "No, sir. Geometric. Perfectly geometric. Uniform density, uniform composition, arranged in rows." I ran the analysis twice because I did not believe it the first time. These are not natural formations. The material density is consistent with refined alloys, not raw ore, and the geometry is too precise, too uniform. There are structures inside these asteroids, artificial structures. Someone hollowed them out and put something inside. The bridge officer beside me, a signals analyst named Ven, leaned over to look at my display. Her mandibles went slack when she saw the numbers. The bridge went quiet, not the comfortable quiet of routine operations, the sharp quiet of a crew that has just heard something impossible. "How many?" Vasan asked. I widened the scan radius. The number climbed. I widened it again. It kept climbing. I pushed the array to its absolute limit, sweeping the entire inner system, and watched the count rise past any number that made rational sense. "Thousands," I said, "at minimum. Metallic signatures inside asteroids, inside moons, inside the rings of the 6th planet. Commander, there are structures embedded in the crust of the 3rd planet. Whatever this is, it spans the entire system." Vasan stood. He walked to my station and looked at the display with his own eyes. I watched him process the data. I watched the color drain from his carapace. "Focus on the nearest cluster," he said. "The outer belt. Show me what is inside those asteroids. I redirected the thermal imaging array and zoomed in on the closest group of anomalies. The hollowed-out interiors of the asteroids resolved on my screen, and I forgot how to breathe. Ships. Row after row of warships, packed in tight formation inside the carved-out rock. They were enormous, angular, aggressive profiles, bristling with weapon hardpoints and armored plating. Designs unlike anything in the Galactic Archive. Unlike anything I had ever seen or studied. They sat in perfect darkness, cold and dormant, their reactors silent, their systems dead. They had been sitting like that for a very long time. Those are warships, Essa whispered from the navigation console. Those are warships inside the asteroids. I cross-referenced the hull profiles against every known database in our system. Military vessels of the Telvari Dominion, the Rithon Collective, the Orani Federation, the Calyx Hegemony. Every spacefaring civilization in the galactic record, going back 2 million years. The search returned no matches, until it reached the very bottom of the archive, a section so old that most scholars considered it mythology, rather than history. One cultural tag, one species designation, one word. Terran. Commander, I said, and my voice sounded strange even to myself. These ships are Terran. The silence that followed was absolute. Every officer on the bridge turned to look at me. The Terrans were a ghost story. A footnote in the oldest records of the oldest civilizations. A species that had risen, fought something terrible, and vanished so completely that most galactic historians argued they had never existed at all. But their ships were here, sleeping inside hollowed-out asteroids, preserved across an ocean of time so vast that it made my mind ache to contemplate. Get me a count, Bassan said. His voice was steady, but his mandibles had stopped clicking entirely, which meant he was more frightened than I had ever seen him. I ran the calculation. The number came back. I ran it again. Same answer. Millions, I said. Commander, there are millions of ships in this system. Vassan opened his mouth to respond, but he never got the chance, because at that exact moment, our active scan beam touched the hull of the nearest warship, and something happened that I will remember for the rest of my life. A pulse of energy erupted from that ship. Not a weapon, not a signal, something deeper, something fundamental, like a heartbeat that had been paused for eons, suddenly resuming. The pulse radiated outward through the asteroid field, and wherever it touched, the dormant signatures responded. 1 by 1, then 10 by 10, then 100 at once, then 1,000. The entire Sol system began to wake up. Millions of metallic signatures that had been cold and dead for longer than any living civilization had existed began to pulse with energy. Inside moons, inside asteroids, inside the rings of gas giants, inside the crust of the third planet from the star. All of them responding to that single pulse, like soldiers hearing a horn they had been waiting 500,000 years to hear. Get us out of here, Vassan said. Full reverse. Engage the hyperdrive. The drive is still cycling from entry, Essa reported, her voice cracking. 40 minutes minimum. 40 minutes. We were trapped in a system that was coming alive around us, surrounded by millions of ancient warships belonging to a species that the galaxy had declared extinct, and we could not leave for 40 minutes. Vassan sat back down. He gripped the arms of his chair until his chitin cracked. Then we watch, he said, and we pray that whatever is waking up is not hungry. I turned back to my screens and stared at the cascade of energy readings spreading across the system like fire through dry grass. Every scan showed the same thing: power building, systems initializing, heat signatures rising from absolute zero to operational temperatures. The Terrans were not extinct. They were sleeping, and we had just rung the alarm. The next 40 minutes were the longest of my life. I spent them hunched over my console, watching the Sol system transform from a graveyard into something that defied every assumption I had ever held about the galaxy, about time, about what was possible. The energy cascade did not stop. It accelerated. Every minute brought new signatures online. Reactor cores that had been cold for 500,000 years flared to life with a precision that suggested they had been designed to survive exactly this duration of dormancy. Power grids inside hollowed-out moons hummed with current. Navigation beacons embedded in asteroid fields began broadcasting in a language that our translation matrices could not decode. "I need everything the archive has on the Terrans," Vasan said. He had not moved from his chair. His compound eyes tracked the displays around the bridge with a focus that bordered on manic. "Everything. Myths, fragments, scraps. I do not care how old or unreliable. Pull it all." I dove into the deep archive. What I found there was almost worse than finding nothing at all. The Telvari records on Terrans were thin, a handful of references scattered across documents that predated our current civilization by a factor of 20. Most were second-hand, pulled from the archives of older species who had themselves pulled them from the archives of even older species. A chain of hearsay stretching back through geological time. But the fragments painted a picture. The Terrans were a young species. Barely 1,000 years into their spacefaring period, when they encountered something catastrophic. The records disagreed on what it was. Some called it the Devourer, others called it the Swarm. The oldest fragments used a word that translated roughly as the Hollow. My blood went cold when I read that word. The Hollow, the same entity that was currently tearing its way through the galactic arm, consuming civilizations like a fire consumes oxygen. The same nightmare that had destroyed the Telvari war fleet at Rith Crossing. The same threat that had driven us into this forbidden system in the first place. I kept reading. The Terrans fought the Hollow. The records were vague on details but unanimous on one point. The war was devastating. It lasted centuries. It killed billions of Terrans. But the Terrans did not lose. Through means that the records could not explain, they drove the Hollow back, out of the galaxy, into the void between galaxies, where it presumably died or dispersed. And then the Terrans vanished. No one knew why, no one knew how. They simply disappeared from the galactic stage, and over the following millennia, their existence faded from history into legend, from legend into myth, from myth into a cautionary tale that scholars invoked when they wanted to illustrate how civilizations could destroy themselves through excess aggression. But there was one more entry. I found it buried in the oldest layer of the archive, a fragment so ancient that the language it was written in had been dead for 100,000 years before the Telvari even evolved. It was a warning, and it appeared in the records of 7 different civilizations that had no known contact with each other. "Do not enter Sol. They are not dead, they are waiting." I read those words and looked up at the displays showing millions of warships powering up across the system, and I understood that every scholar who had dismissed the Terrans as mythology had been catastrophically, dangerously wrong. "Commander," I said, "I think I know what we have found, and I think it is connected to the Hollow." Before Vasan could respond, the communications officer let out a sound that I had never heard a Telvari make. A high, thin whine of pure shock. "We are being hailed," she said. "Something is transmitting directly to us." "Source?" Vasan demanded. "Everywhere," she said. "The signal is coming from everywhere at once." The transmission hit our communication array like a wave. It was powerful enough to override our filters, our encryption, our security protocols. It cycled through frequencies at blinding speed, searching for one we could receive. Then it began cycling through languages. I recognized fragments of Rithon, snippets of Orani trade pidgin, a stretch of something that might have been ancient Calyx. And then it found Telvari Common, and a voice spoke to us. Not a living voice. Something smoother than that. Something more precise. An artificial intelligence of a sophistication that made our most advanced systems look like counting beads. Unidentified vessel. This is Aegis, Autonomous Emergency Guardian Intelligence System, Terran Strategic Defense Network. You have entered a protected zone and activated proximity alert protocols. State your species and purpose. Nobody spoke. The bridge crew stared at the speakers as if they expected a weapon to come through them. Vasan recovered first. He stood, straightened his uniform, and addressed the empty air with a formality that I admired desperately in that moment. "This is Commander Dreth Vasan, of the Telvari Dominion Survey Cruiser, Pale Vigil. We entered this system, seeking aid against an existential threat to our civilization. A pause, processing. Then, Aegis spoke again, and the question it asked changed the course of galactic history. Is the Hollow back? 3 words. Asked with a calm that suggested the answer was already known and had been anticipated for 500,000 years. Vassan looked at me. I looked at him. We both understood what this question meant. The Terrans had not destroyed themselves. They had not faded away. They had gone to sleep because they knew, with absolute certainty, that the Hollow would return, and they had left a machine awake to watch for it. Yes, Vassan said, the Hollow is back. It has been consuming civilizations along the galactic rim for 23 years. Our fleet is destroyed. Our homeworld is under siege. We are losing. Another pause. Longer this time. When Aegis spoke again, the tone had not changed, but something in the quality of the transmission shifted. It became harder, tighter, like a machine that had been idling for millennia, suddenly engaging its full capacity. Confirmed, Hollow resurgence, verified against predictive models, initiating Revival Protocol 7, estimated full fleet activation, 11 hours, 14 minutes. All stasis installations entering sequential wake cycle. Terran Strategic Command will be operational within 90 minutes. A brief silence. Commander Vassan, do not leave this system. From this moment forward, you and your crew are under Terran protection. Essa made a small choking sound. The weapons officer gripped his console so hard that the frame bent. Even Vassan, who had held himself together through the destruction of our fleet, through 3 weeks of running through dead systems, through the decision to enter the most forbidden region of space in the galaxy, even Vassan sat down slowly, as if his legs had simply decided they were done. Aegis, I said, speaking before I realized I was going to. How many ships are in this fleet? The Terran Strategic Reserve consists of 4,200,000 combat vessels, distributed across 6,112 stasis installations within the Sol system. Total crew complement in cryogenic suspension, 912,400,000 Terran personnel. The numbers landed on the bridge like physical blows. 4 million warships, 900 million soldiers, preserved across 500,000 years for this single purpose. Additional data, Aegis continued. The Terran Strategic Reserve was placed in stasis 497,312 years ago upon conclusion of the First Hollow War. Fleet composition, weapons systems, and tactical doctrine were optimized for engagement with Hollow-type entities based on 207 years of continuous combat data. All systems have been maintained at operational readiness throughout the dormancy period. Maintenance protocols include full diagnostic cycling every 12 standard years, component replacement from onboard fabrication reserves, and cryogenic pod integrity verification every 6 standard years. 0 critical system failures have occurred during the dormancy period. I let that sink in. 0 failures, across 500,000 years, across 4 million warships, and 900 million cryogenic pods. Whatever Aegis was, whoever had built it, they had created something that operated with a perfection that made the laws of entropy seem like suggestions. Maintained, for 500,000 years, this artificial intelligence had kept 4 million warships battle-ready. Cycling coolant, replacing degraded components, monitoring cryogenic pods, running diagnostic after diagnostic after diagnostic. Alone, in the dark. In a system that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten, guarding a fleet that nobody remembered, waiting for a signal that might never come. Until today. The first pod is opening, Aegis announced. I pulled up the visual feed that Aegis routed to our systems. A stasis chamber, deep inside the largest moon of the system's 5th planet. Row after row of cryogenic pods stretched into the distance, lit by the blue-white glow of preservation fields. One pod in the front row was cycling through its revival sequence. Frost cracked. Seals released. The transparent cover slid back, and steam billowed upward. A figure sat up. A Terran. A human. Smaller than I expected. Bipedal, with smooth skin and dark hair, and 2 forward-facing eyes that opened and locked onto the camera feed, with a focus that made my carapace itch. There was no confusion in those eyes, no disorientation, no fear. The human took a single deep breath, the first breath those lungs had drawn in 500,000 years, and swung their legs off the pod in one smooth motion. They looked at the camera. They looked through the camera, directly at us, as if they knew we were watching. And then they smiled. Not a warm smile, not a greeting. The smile of someone who had gone to sleep knowing exactly what they would wake up to, and finding that the universe had not disappointed them. Across the Sol system, in 6,000 installations spread across moons and asteroids and the hollowed-out bones of ancient worlds, 900 million humans began to wake up. The awakening was not chaos. That was the part that frightened me most. 900 million beings who had been frozen for 500,000 years, waking up in an era so far removed from their own that the stars had shifted in their constellations, and there was no chaos, no panic, no screaming, no crying, no confusion. They woke up like soldiers, responding to an alarm they had been trained to expect. Because they had been. Aegis fed us visual and data streams from installations across the system, and I watched the revival cascade unfold with a feeling that existed somewhere between awe and nausea. The stasis chambers operated in sequence, each installation following a precise schedule that brought critical personnel online first: command staff, engineering crews, weapons specialists, medical teams. Each one emerged from their pod, checked their equipment, reported to their station, and began working, as if they had been asleep for a night, not an epoch. Within the first 2 hours, reactor cores aboard the warships began igniting, not randomly, in cascading chains that rippled through the fleet like dominoes falling. Each ship powered its systems in a specific order: reactor, then shields, then life support, then weapons, then engines. I watched the thermal signatures on my display shift from cold blue to blazing white, as warship after warship came alive. Then the moons began to open. I will never forget the sight. The fourth moon of the fifth planet, a body nearly 3,000 kilometers across, split along fault lines that I now realized were engineered seams. The two halves drifted apart with ponderous grace, and from inside the hollow core, warships emerged. Not small ones. These were dreadnoughts, capital ships so large that they made the pale vigil look like a lifeboat beside a mountain. They slid out of their cradles, trailing frozen gases, their running lights igniting in sequence as Aegis brought each system online. 12 dreadnoughts from Installation 9, Aegis reported. Hull integrity at 99.7% across all vessels, all crews at action stations. 12 dreadnoughts from one installation. There were 6,000 installations. ESA tracked the emerging ships on her navigation display and quietly informed Commander Vassan that she was going to need a larger screen. The hours passed. More ships. More moons cracking open. Asteroid fields that had appeared natural resolved into perfectly organized fleets, their rocky shells splitting away to reveal the gleaming hulls beneath. The sixth planet's rings, which I had assumed were natural formations of ice and dust, turned out to contain an entire carrier group. The carriers were each 7 kilometers long, and they emerged from the rings like predators surfacing from still water. And then there was Earth. The third planet from the star had always registered as geologically odd on our scans. Now I understood why. Beneath the oceans, beneath the continents, the Terrans had built vast underground shipyards and launch complexes carved into the planet's crust, sealed against time, powered by geothermal taps that had been running since before the Telvari species existed. When Aegis activated the planetary installations, the oceans shifted. Shorelines receded, as water drained into subterranean channels, clearing the way for launch bays the size of cities. From those bays, the largest ships in the fleet rose through the atmosphere on pillars of plasma so bright they were visible across the system. Continent-class carriers, each one 20 kilometers long, living cities of war that climbed into orbit trailing streamers of cloud vapor, their hulls still wet from the oceans that had hidden them for 500 millennia. The water that ran off their armor plating fell back to Earth as rain, and I imagined what it must look like from the surface. Steel mountains rising from the sea, blotting out the sun, ascending on columns of fire toward the stars, a sight that no living being had witnessed in 500,000 years. The scale was beyond anything I had the capacity to emotionally process. I kept running calculations, converting the numbers into terms I could understand, and they kept exceeding my ability to comprehend. The total mass of the Terran fleet exceeded the mass of some moons. The combined energy output of all 4 million reactors, when fully operational, rivaled a small star. The ammunition reserves alone, the physical projectiles and energy cell banks and warhead stores, weighed more than my entire homeworld's industrial output for a decade. I sat at my console and watched a civilization resurrect itself, and I understood something that no xenoarchaeology textbook had ever taught me. The Terrans had not merely survived their war with the Hollow, they had learned from it. They had analyzed the Hollow's patterns, calculated when it would return, and then made a decision so audacious, so impossibly far-sighted, that it bordered on insanity. They had put their entire species on pause, dismantled their colonies, recalled their citizens, sealed themselves in their home system with the largest war fleet ever assembled, and said to the universe, "Wake us when it comes back." And Aegis had been their alarm clock for 500,000 years. Commander Vasan. The communication officer's voice pulled me out of my daze. "We are receiving an invitation. The Terran flagship is requesting our presence." Vasan looked at me. "You are coming with me," he said. "You are the closest thing we have to an expert on these people." I wanted to point out that my expertise consisted of reading 3 pages of fragmentary mythology, but the commander was already walking to the shuttle bay. We crossed the gap between the Pale Vigil and the Terran flagship in a shuttle that felt very small and very fragile amid the stream of warships moving into formation around us. The flagship was called the Last Calculation, and it was a command dreadnought 7 kilometers long, armored in material that our sensors could not identify, bristling with weapon arrays that our computers could not classify. We docked at a bay that could have held our entire ship. Terran officers met us at the airlock. They were polite, professional, and deeply strange, bipedal, soft-skinned, eyes that locked onto you with an intensity that felt like being targeted by a weapon system. They wore dark uniforms with insignia I could not read, and they moved with the fluid efficiency of beings who had trained for war until it became as natural as breathing. They led us through corridors that hummed with energy and purpose, past compartments where crews worked at stations that glowed with holographic displays, past armories where weapons I could not name hung in precise rows, and into a command center the size of a cathedral. Fleet Admiral Corin Damara stood at the central command table. She was tall for a human, dark skin, silver-streaked hair cut short, eyes the color of burned copper. She looked up when we entered, and I saw her take in our appearance, our posture, our species, our rank insignia, in a single glance that lasted less than a second. She was 34 years old, biologically. She had been born 500,000 years ago. "Commander Vasan," she said. Her voice was warm, and the warmth was what unsettled me. I had expected cold efficiency from a species that had engineered its own hibernation across geological time. What I got instead was a woman who crossed the room and offered her hand in a gesture of greeting that was so genuinely human, it made my chest ache with a feeling I could not name. "Thank you for coming. And thank you for triggering our proximity protocols. Aegis tells me you arrived ahead of our projected timeline, and that may have saved lives." Vasan took her hand with the careful delicacy of someone handling an artifact. "Admiral Damara, I must be direct with you. My homeworld is under siege. My fleet is destroyed. My people are dying. We entered your system because we had exhausted every other option." Damara nodded. "I know. Aegis has been monitoring galactic communications since the first Hollow sighting 23 years ago. We have been tracking the situation from dormancy, waiting for either a direct contact or a threat threshold that would trigger automatic revival." She gestured to the command table, and a holographic map of the galaxy bloomed into existence above it. Red zones marked the Hollow's advance. There were many red zones. You would have reached the threshold within 48 hours regardless. Your arrival simply moved the clock forward. She had known. Aegis had known. For 23 years, while civilizations burned and species died, the Terran intelligence system had been watching from inside its cocoon of hollowed-out moons, calculating, waiting for the precise moment when intervention would have maximum effect. The first Hollow War lasted 207 years, Damara continued. She spoke with the measured cadence of someone delivering a briefing, but there was weight beneath the words. History that she had lived, scars that she carried. It killed 40 billion of our people, nearly ended our species. We drove the Hollow out of the galaxy, but we knew it would regenerate. Our models predicted a return window between 400,000 and 600,000 years. So you chose to wait, I said. Damara looked at me. Those copper eyes held something vast and tired and ferociously determined. We voted, she said. Every human alive at the end of the First War voted. The question was simple. Do we go on with our lives and leave future generations to face the Hollow alone, or do we sacrifice our present to guarantee the future a fighting chance? The vote was not close. We chose to sleep. The weight of that decision settled over me like a physical thing. An entire species, at the peak of its power, choosing to abandon everything. Their cities, their culture, their art, their daily lives, all of it surrendered so that they could be here, in this moment, ready to fight an enemy that would not arrive for longer than most species existed. We dismantled our colonies, Damara said, recalled every citizen, built the stasis fleet, sealed our civilization into Sol, and entrusted Aegis with our survival. The civilizations that rose after us were never told the truth, because our models showed that knowledge of the Hollow's inevitable return would cause societal collapse in younger species. We chose to bear the burden alone. You chose to be forgotten, Vasan said. We chose to be ready, Damara corrected gently. She touched the command table, and the holographic display zoomed in on a particular region of the map, a cluster of star systems near the galactic core. We also left gifts, technological caches hidden in uninhabited systems along the rim, medical databases, agricultural techniques, things that might help the civilizations that came after us, without revealing our existence or the reason for it. We tried to protect you even while we were sleeping. We never found any caches, Vasan said. Most of them were discovered and used without attribution. Your own Telvari medical tradition includes gene therapy techniques that were derived from one of our caches, filtered through 3 intermediate civilizations over the course of 200,000 years. You did not know where it came from. That was the point. I stared at her. The depth of planning. The patience. A species that had seeded the galaxy with anonymous gifts to help civilizations that would not exist for hundreds of thousands of years, and then gone to sleep without ever expecting to be thanked. Aegis interrupted with a data update. The holographic map refreshed, and new red zones appeared. The Hollow was moving faster now, spreading through the galactic rim like an infection through a body. 17 civilizations marked as consumed, dozens more under direct threat. The Telvari homeworld pulsed at the edge of a red zone that was closing like a fist. I stared at that map and felt despair wrap around my hearts. Even with 4 million warships, even with 900 million soldiers, the scale of the Hollow's advance was staggering. It was everywhere. It was consuming everything. Can you stop it? I asked. The question came out raw and unguarded, stripped of the professional composure I should have maintained. Admiral, can you actually stop this? Damara studied the map. She studied it the way a surgeon studies an injury before cutting. Calm, focused, seeing not the damage but the path to repair. This is what we built ourselves for, she said. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon. 500,000 years of waiting for exactly this. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw something that I had not seen in any living being since the Hollow's advance began. Not hope, something harder than hope, certainty. We are going to end it, permanently. Behind us, through the panoramic viewport of the Last Calculations Command Center, the Terran fleet continued to assemble. 4 million warships, taking formation in the light of their ancient star. A force that had been patient for longer than patience had any right to last, stirring from a sleep that had outlasted civilizations, empires, and the memory of its own existence. Damara turned to the command table and began issuing orders. Her voice carried across the cathedral-sized room with an authority that brooked no hesitation and expected none. Officers responded instantly. Tactical displays shifted. Fleet formations realigned. The last calculation's engines built toward a rumble that I could feel through the deck plates and up through my bones. Fleet status, Damara said. 87% of combat vessels at full operational capacity, Aegis reported, remaining 13% completing final system checks. Full fleet readiness in 4 hours, 17 minutes. All weapon systems report green. All crew accounted for. Damara nodded. Set course for the Telvari home system. All combat groups. Formation hammer. She said it the way someone might say pass the water. Casually. Without drama. As if redirecting 4 million warships across the galaxy was not the single most significant military decision in recorded history. I looked at Vasan. He looked at me. We were both thinking the same thing. Either we had just witnessed the salvation of the galaxy, or we were standing inside the greatest hallucination in Telvari medical history. The fleet began to move, not slowly, not tentatively. 4 million warships oriented toward the galactic rim, with a coordination that made our own military operations look like insects bumping into each other in the dark. Aegis synchronized their movements down to the millisecond. Drive fields spooled up across the system in a wave of blue-white energy that turned the darkness of space into something that looked like dawn. I stood on the observation deck of the last calculation and watched the sky fill with engines. Terran engines. Human engines. The engines of a species that had put itself to sleep for 500,000 years and woken up with its warface on, ready to do the one thing it had been designed to do. The ship beneath my feet hummed. Not just with power, with purpose. A purpose that had been patient for 500,000 years, and was patient no longer. Around us, through us, past us, the fleet accelerated toward the edge of the system, toward hyperspace, toward the hollow, toward the war they had been built for. I gripped the railing and watched them go, and for the first time since the hollow had appeared on our borders, for the first time in 23 years, I felt something I had forgotten existed. Not hope. Something bigger than hope. The feeling of standing beside something unstoppable. The jump to hyperspace nearly broke reality. I know how that sounds. I know that hyperspace transit is supposed to be smooth. A brief shimmer as the drive field engages. A period of visual distortion, and then arrival. I have made dozens of jumps in my career. They are routine. They are boring. This was not boring. 4 million warships entered hyperspace simultaneously. Not in waves, not in staggered groups. All at once, in a single coordinated pulse that Aegis timed down to the nanosecond. The effect on local spacetime was immediate and violent. Reality shuddered. There is no other word for it. The fabric of space itself recoiled from the sheer magnitude of what was passing through it, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I could feel dimensions that should not be perceptible to a being with a standard neurological architecture. Then it was over. And we were in hyperspace, and 4 million warships were screaming toward the Telvari home system at speeds that our best physicists would have called theoretical. Transit time, 6 hours, 31 minutes, Aegis announced. The artificial intelligence managed the fleet with a casual omnipotence that made me deeply uncomfortable. It tracked every ship, every system, every crew member, simultaneously, making micro-adjustments to drive fields and formation spacing, with a speed and precision that no living mind could match. 6 hours. I had 6 hours to process the fact that I was standing aboard a warship that was 500,000 years old, surrounded by humans who had been born before my species evolved, heading toward a battle that would determine whether the galaxy continued to exist. I spent those hours exploring the last calculation, not because Vasan ordered me to, though he did suggest it. I explored because I needed to understand these people. My training was in xenoarchaeology. I studied dead civilizations. I had never had the opportunity to study a living one that should have been dead, and the professional in me recognized that I was witnessing something unprecedented. The humans were preparing for war. That much was immediately obvious. Every corridor hummed with activity. Crew members moved with purpose, checking systems, running drills, calibrating weapons. But what struck me was not the activity itself. It was the quality of it, the quiet, the focus, the complete absence of panic or uncertainty. These people had gone to sleep, expecting to wake up to the end of the world. And now that it was happening, they moved through it like water through a channel. Naturally, inevitably. I spoke with a weapons officer named Helen Marsh. She was calibrating a directed energy array that ran the length of the ship's port side. She was young, maybe 30 by human standards, with calloused hands and steady eyes. "Does it bother you?" I asked. "Everything you knew is gone. Your world, your time period, everyone you ever met outside this fleet. 500,000 years have passed." She paused in her work, looked at me with those strange human eyes that had pupils like targeting reticles. "Of course it bothers me," she said. "I had a cat. Her name was Biscuit. She has been dead for 500,000 years, and I loved her, and yes, that bothers me." She turned back to her console. But I did not go to sleep expecting to come back to the world I left. None of us did. We went to sleep to fight. That is what I am going to do. I can mourn later. "Were you afraid?" I asked, "when you went into the pod, knowing you might never wake up?" She thought about it. Genuinely thought about it. Not dismissing the question, but sitting with it. "I was 26 when I went under. I had been fighting the Hollow for 8 years. I had lost friends, lost family, lost an entire colony I was stationed at when the Hollow overran it. By the time the vote happened, I was not afraid of sleeping. I was afraid of what would happen to the people who came after us if we did not." She looked at me. "Are you afraid right now?" "Terrified," I said. "Good," she said. "Fear means you have something to lose. Hold on to that." I found a Marine sergeant named Daniel Holt in one of the armories, assembling a weapon that I could not identify. He was older than Marsh, with scars on his arms that he told me came from the First Hollow War. His hands moved with the automatic precision of someone who had assembled that weapon thousands of times before. "You fought them before," I said. "For 40 years, he replied. "I was 17 when I enlisted. Spent my 18th birthday in a trench on a moon called Harbor, watching the sky turn black as the Hollow descended. Lost my first squad there, lost 3 more squads after that. By the time we drove the Hollow out, I was 57, I had buried more friends than I could count, and I had not slept a full night in 2 decades. He locked a component into place with a click. So when they offered me a chance to sleep for 500,000 years, the irony was not lost on me. "Were you married? Did you have children?" "My wife, Grace, she was an engineer on the fleet maintenance crews. She went into stasis the same day I did, 2 pods down from mine. She will be waking up right about now, probably annoyed that I got to the armory before her." A brief smile crossed his face. "No children. We agreed we would not bring children into the First War. Maybe now, after this is done, we will have that chance." He looked at me with eyes that had seen the worst things the universe could offer, and still found reasons to plan for the future. That is why I voted to sleep. Not because I wanted to fight again. Because I knew what would happen to whoever came after us, if we did not. There it was. The thing I kept circling but could not quite grasp. The humans had not done this for glory. Not for empire. Not even for survival. Because their survival was not at stake when they made the choice. The Hollow was gone. They had won. They could have lived out their lives, built new cities, explored the galaxy, and let future species deal with the Hollow's return on their own. They chose not to. They chose to sacrifice everything, every comfort, every joy, every ordinary Tuesday morning, so that beings they would never meet would have a chance. I wandered into a section of the ship that housed cultural archives. It was a library of sorts, the sum total of human knowledge and art and music and history, preserved in crystalline storage matrices that Aegis had maintained alongside the fleet. I browsed through it and found poetry and mathematics and recipes for something called chocolate cake, and a staggering amount of fiction about exactly the scenario they were currently living. Apparently, humans had been imagining this kind of thing long before they ever left their planet. "They always knew," I murmured to myself. "They always knew they were the kind of species that would do this." My communicator buzzed. Vassan's voice, tight with tension. "Kale, report to the flag bridge. We are dropping out of hyperspace in 20 minutes. I ran. The corridors of the last calculation blurred past me, and humans stepped aside with practiced efficiency as I moved through them. They did not stare. They did not ask questions. They simply made room and went back to their stations. Every one of them focused on the same point in space-time, the same moment that was rushing toward us like a wall. The flag bridge was an enormous space at the heart of the dreadnought, dominated by a holographic tactical display that showed the Telvari home system in real time. Aegis had been monitoring the situation via long-range sensors, and what I saw on that display made my legs weaken. The hollow was already there. It filled the outer system like a disease, bioorganic vessels numbering in the hundreds of thousands, each one a nightmare of pulsing tissue and crystalline armor, consuming the outer planets for raw material. They were processing the gas giants, stripping hydrogen and helium, and heavier elements to fuel their growth cycle. Where the hollow fed, nothing remained. Not rock, not gas, not light. And at the center of their formation, huddled around the Telvari homeworld like the last ember in a dying fire, the remnants of the Telvari defense fleet fought a battle they had already lost. A few hundred ships, damaged, outgunned, outnumbered 1,000 to 1, holding a perimeter that was shrinking by the hour. "That is my home," I said. Damara appeared beside me. She studied the tactical display with that clinical calm that I was beginning to understand was not coldness but discipline. The discipline of someone who had seen worse and survived it. "Your defense fleet is holding a standard perimeter pattern around the second planet," she said. "They are good. They have been fighting for weeks, and they have not broken." "They are dying," I said. "Not anymore." She turned to the bridge crew. "All ships, prepare for hyperspace exit. Formation hammer. Weapons free upon arrival. Aegis, coordinate targeting priorities. Hollow swarm elements first, then resource processors, then the main body. Do not let them consolidate." The countdown began. I stood beside Commander Vasan and watched the seconds drain away. My hearts were beating so hard that I could feel my carapace vibrating. This was it. Everything came down to the next few minutes. Either the Terran fleet would do what they had been built to do, or the Telvari homeworld would die. The counter hit 0. 4 million warships dropped out of hyperspace simultaneously, and the Telvari home system lit up like a newborn star. The formation was called Hammer, and I understood why immediately. The Terran fleet arrived in a wall formation that stretched across the entire system, edge to edge, no gaps, no weak points. A solid barrier of warships that materialized between the Hollow and the Telvari homeworld, like a shield slamming into place. The Hollow reacted instantly. The swarm turned, millions of bioorganic units pivoting from the consumed outer planets to face this new presence. They moved with the fluid coordination of a single organism, which is what they were. A distributed intelligence spread across millions of bodies, each one an extension of a central will. They surged toward the Terran line, and the Terran line opened fire. I have seen weapons discharges before. I have seen fleet engagements in simulation, and, once, at long range during the retreat from Rith Crossing. Nothing I had seen prepared me for what the Terrans did. Their weapons were not like ours. Telvari weapons, like those of most galactic species, operated on principles of kinetic impact and thermal damage. Hit the target hard enough or hot enough to break it. Simple. Effective against conventional threats. The Terrans did not fight conventionally. Their directed energy weapons operated on a frequency that targeted the Hollow's bioorganic structure at the molecular level. The beams did not burn. They unraveled. Wherever they touched the Hollow's flesh, cellular bonds simply ceased to exist. Tissue dissolved. Crystalline armor crumbled to powder. Living ships that had been consuming planets minutes earlier came apart like wet paper in a rainstorm. Their warheads were worse. Missiles that detonated inside the Hollow's mass and introduced a cascading cellular necrosis that spread through connected tissue like poison through a bloodstream. A single warhead could kill 100 Hollow organisms as the necrosis jumped from body to body through the biological links that held the swarm together. And their tactics. Their tactics were something beyond anything I had words for. Aegis coordinated 4 million ships as a single entity. Every maneuver, every firing solution, every defensive adjustment happened simultaneously across the entire fleet. When the Hollow tried to flank, Terran ships were already there. When it tried to concentrate its mass for a breakthrough, Terran weapons were already targeting the focal point. When it adapted its armor composition to resist the energy weapons, The Terrans switched to kinetic rounds that shattered the new configuration before the Hollow could stabilize it. 200 years of fighting this exact enemy. They had seen every trick, every adaptation, every strategy the Hollow could deploy. They had studied it, cataloged it, built weapons specifically designed to counter it, and then they had put those weapons in stasis for 500,000 years and brought them out today, fresh and lethal and perfectly calibrated. The Hollow was dying. I watched it die on the tactical display. Red zones shrinking, bioorganic mass dissipating, the swarm fragmenting as the Terran fleet cut through it with methodical, devastating precision. But it was not dying quietly. The Hollow fought back with a ferocity that defied reason. Swarm elements threw themselves at Terran ships in waves, wrapping around hulls and trying to digest them. Some succeeded. I watched Terran vessels disappear beneath mountains of pulsing tissue, their crews fighting to the last second before their ships were consumed. Each loss was a ship full of people who had slept for 500,000 years and survived only minutes after waking. A dreadnought called the Morning Bell went down with all hands when 3 hollow tendrils pierced its reactor shielding simultaneously. 2,000 crew, gone. Daniel Holt, the Marine sergeant who had fought the First War, who had gone to sleep because he could not bear to leave the next generation undefended, was aboard the Morning Bell. I never learned whether Helen Marsh survived. The directed energy array she had been calibrating was destroyed by a hollow ram ship in the first hour of engagement. I hoped she made it to an escape pod. I did not ask. But the line held. That was the thing that mattered. That was the thing that defined everything about what the Terrans were. The line held. Ships died, and the line held. Crews burned, and the line held. The Hollow threw everything it had at them, every nightmare, every adaptation, every trick from its ancient playbook of consumption and horror. And the Terran fleet absorbed the punishment and kept advancing. Damara stood at the center of the flag bridge and commanded the battle with a calm that bordered on inhuman. Her voice never rose. Her orders never wavered. She directed 4 million ships the way a conductor directs an orchestra, each movement precise, each decision building towards something that I could not yet see, but could feel approaching like a wave. Around her, the flag bridge operated at a tempo that made my head spin. Officers called out ship statuses, casualty reports, ammunition expenditures, and shield integrity readings, in a constant stream that Damara absorbed and processed without visible effort. She issued course corrections for entire battle groups, based on sensor data that was seconds old. She redirected reserve forces to plug gaps before the gaps fully formed. She anticipated the Hollow's movements with an accuracy that suggested she was not merely reacting to the battle, but reading it, the way a musician reads a score, knowing what comes next because she had played this piece before. She had played it before, for 200 years. The Hollow began to retreat, not a fighting withdrawal, a retreat, a rout. The swarm pulled back from the Telvari homeworld, abandoning the partially consumed outer planets, fleeing toward the edge of the system. For the first time in 23 years, the Hollow was running. And then it did something that made Damara's expression change for the first time since the battle began. Something that made Aegis's voice, always calm, always measured, carry a note of what I could only describe as concern. The Hollow stopped running. In every system where it had a presence, across the entire galaxy, it stopped. Every swarm fragment, every tendril, every bioorganic warship and resource processor and scout. They all stopped, simultaneously, as if responding to a single command. And they began to move toward one point. Aegis, Damara said. Analysis. The Hollow is consolidating, Aegis reported. All distributed elements are converging on coordinates at the galactic rim. Current trajectory suggests full consolidation within 72 hours. Projected mass at consolidation? Sufficient to darken a star system. Estimated individual organisms at consolidation, 4 trillion. This behavior was not observed during the First Hollow War. Damara stared at the tactical display. The streams of red converging from across the galaxy. Trillions of organisms flowing together like rivers meeting the sea, building something that had never existed before. A single entity of a size and power that made the swarm we had just defeated look like a scouting party. It is afraid, Damara said quietly. For the first time, it is afraid. And afraid, things consolidate. Vasan leaned forward. Admiral, if that mass is as large as Aegis projects, can your weapons still destroy it? Our conventional weapons, no, not at that density. When the Hollow fought as a distributed swarm, we could isolate and destroy individual elements. That was our advantage. A consolidated entity of that scale would absorb conventional fire and regenerate faster than we could damage it. She did not look away from the display. But the Hollow was not the only thing we put into stasis. 500,000 years ago, we also preserved a weapon that we built specifically for this possibility. A weapon we never had to use in the First War because the Hollow never consolidated. You planned for a scenario that had not happened yet, I said. We planned for every scenario, Damara replied. That is what 500,000 years of dormancy buys you. Time to think. She turned to face the bridge. Every officer, every crew member, every human on that ship looked at her and waited. All fleets, set course for the rim. We finish this. No speeches, no dramatics, just the order, and 4 million warships turning toward the edge of the galaxy like a blade turning toward its target. Behind us, the Telvari homeworld turned slowly in the light of its star, battered and scarred but alive. My people were alive. Because of the humans. Because 500,000 years ago, a species I had never heard of had looked at the future and decided to be there for it. The fleet jumped. Toward the rim. Toward the end. The galactic rim was a place where stars grew thin, and the darkness between them stretched so wide that it felt like the universe was forgetting to exist. We gathered there, at the edge of everything, and waited for the Hollow to finish becoming the thing it intended to become. It took 61 hours. I spent them aboard the last calculation, watching the tactical feeds as trillions of hollow organisms converged on a single point in space. They came from every direction, streams of bioorganic matter flowing through hyperspace and normal space alike, merging and fusing and growing. By the time the convergence was complete, the consolidated hollow was so large that it registered on long-range sensors as a small nebula. Aegis provided the numbers in its usual dispassionate fashion. The consolidated entity spanned 400,000 kilometers across. It contained approximately 4 trillion individual organisms fused into a single mass. It had a distributed neural network with a processing capacity that Aegis estimated exceeded any known artificial intelligence in the galaxy, including Aegis itself. It had consumed enough raw material in its 23-year campaign to fuel its systems for millennia. It was, by any rational measure, the most dangerous thing that had ever existed. It did not do this during the First War, Damara said. She stood at the command table with her senior officers, studying the consolidated mass with narrowed eyes. During the First War, it fought as a distributed swarm, individual organisms, loosely coordinated. This is different. This is a single entity. Adaptation, said her tactical officer, a lean man named Peter Galloway. It learned from the First War. Distributed swarms are vulnerable to the kind of targeted warfare we specialize in, so it consolidated into something we cannot pick apart piece by piece. Can we still kill it? Vasan asked. He and I had been given standing permission to attend all briefings. I think Damara wanted us there, as representatives of the galaxy the humans had woken up to save, a reminder of what was at stake. Damara looked at Aegis's holographic projection of the consolidated hollow. It pulsed with a slow, organic rhythm that resembled breathing, or a heartbeat. Aegis, tactical assessment. Direct engagement with current fleet assets would result in mutual annihilation, Aegis reported. The consolidated entity possesses sufficient mass and regenerative capacity to absorb and counter conventional Terran weapon systems. However, unconventional options exist. Specify. Protocol Omega, the Cascade weapon. A murmur ran through the bridge officers. I saw recognition in their faces, mixed with something else. Not fear, reverence. Whatever Protocol Omega was, it meant something profound to these people. Damara was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded. Begin preparations, and open a channel to the Allied fleets. Allied fleets. In the 61 hours since the Telvari homeworld was liberated, word of the Terran awakening had spread across the galaxy. Ships had come, not many, compared to the Terran armada, A few thousand vessels from a dozen species, Telvari cruisers, Rithon destroyers, Orani frigates, ships crewed by beings who had watched their civilizations crumble and now followed the only force in the galaxy that had ever made the Hollow retreat. Vasan had ordered the Pale Vigil into the formation. I did not argue. We had come to Sol looking for salvation. We had found it. The least we could do was stand beside it. Damara's address to the combined fleet was broadcast on every channel. I listened from the flag bridge, surrounded by humans who had been born in an era so distant that it might as well have been a different universe. She did not give a speech. She gave them the truth. This is Fleet Admiral Corin Damara, Terran Strategic Command. I am speaking to every vessel in this formation, Terran and Allied alike. In approximately 4 hours, we will engage the consolidated Hollow entity at the Galactic Rim. I will not pretend this will be easy. The entity is the largest hostile organism ever recorded. It possesses capabilities we have not seen before and cannot fully predict. She paused. Let the weight of it settle. 500,000 years ago, my species made a choice. We chose to go to sleep. We chose to give up everything, our present, our futures, our lives as we knew them, so that we could be here for this moment. We did not do this for glory. We did not do this for conquest. We did it because we fought the Hollow once, and we saw what it does to the living. We saw planets stripped to the core. We saw species consumed. We saw minds devoured and bodies repurposed, and civilizations reduced to raw material. And we decided that we would not let that happen to whoever came after us. Her voice did not waver. It did not rise. It simply carried, clear and certain, through the void between stars. To our allied crews, from every species that has answered this call, I want you to know something. You are not spectators here. You are not support elements. You are the reason we slept. You are the reason we are here. Every species in this formation, every crew member, every being that chose to come to this fight, you are what we were protecting. For 500,000 years, you are what we were protecting. I looked at Vasan. His mandibles were still. His compound eyes gleamed in the light of the tactical displays. I realized, with a shock that went deeper than professional observation, that he was moved. A Telvari commander who had watched his fleet burn, who had run through dead systems for weeks, who had made the desperate gamble of entering Sol, was standing on a human warship and listening to a woman born 500,000 years ago tell him that he mattered. Formation Omega in 3 hours, Damara concluded. All ships to battle stations. We end this today. The channel closed. The fleet prepared. I found a viewport and stood there, watching the Hollow's consolidated mass pulse at the edge of sensor range. It was so large that it had its own gravitational signature, bending the light of distant stars around its edges. It was alive and aware and waiting for us, with an intelligence that had consumed hundreds of species and learned from each one. And we were going to fight it. A fleet of ancient ships piloted by ancient soldiers, supported by the battered remnants of a dozen civilizations, flying toward the largest living thing in the galaxy with nothing but weapons and will. The 3 hours passed. Formation Omega took shape. The Terran fleet rearranged itself into a configuration that I did not recognize from any tactical manual I had studied. Not a wall, not a sphere. Something more complex. A 3-dimensional structure that Aegis adjusted in real time. Ships flowing into position with the precision of components in a machine. "What is the shape?" I asked Galloway, who was monitoring the formation from his tactical station. "A funnel," he said. "We are going to drive it into a kill zone." The engagement began without ceremony. No countdown, no dramatic pause. Damara said, "Execute," and 4 million warships surged forward. The consolidated Hollow reacted with a speed that belied its enormous mass. It extended tendrils of bioorganic matter, each one hundreds of kilometers long, reaching for the approaching fleet like fingers reaching for prey. The tendrils were lined with weapon nodules that fired biological projectiles, acid-tipped spines that could penetrate ship armor and begin digesting the hull from the inside. The Terran vanguard took the first hits. Ships on the outer edge of the formation absorbed tendril strikes and kept moving. Some survived, some did not. I watched a heavy cruiser called the Daybreak get impaled by 3 tendrils simultaneously, its hull buckling as acid ate through armor plating that had withstood 500,000 years of dormancy, only to fail in the first minutes of the battle it was built for. But the formation held. The funnel shape directed the hollow's tendrils inward, channeling its attacks into a narrowing field where overlapping fields of fire from multiple ship groups could concentrate on individual threats. Tendrils were severed. Weapon nodules were neutralized. The Terran fleet cut its way forward through a forest of reaching horrors, paying in blood for every kilometer, but never stopping. The hollow adapted. It always adapted. The tendrils thickened, growing armored shells that resisted directed energy weapons. It began deploying smaller organisms, fast-moving interceptors that swarmed individual ships and tried to overwhelm point defense systems. It generated electromagnetic interference that disrupted targeting solutions and communication networks. Aegis countered. Every adaptation met with an adjustment. Weapons frequencies shifted. Formation patterns changed. New tactical protocols deployed in milliseconds. The artificial intelligence had spent 500,000 years in the dark, with nothing to do but think, and in those eons of solitude, it had modeled every possible hollow response, and prepared a counter for each one. But the hollow was doing things Aegis had never modeled. The consolidation had given it capabilities that did not exist during the First War. It began generating localized gravity wells, miniature singularities that bent space around clusters of Terran ships and crushed them together. 3 destroyers in my visual range folded like paper as space itself twisted around them. The Allied ships fought alongside the Terrans. The Pale Vigil was in the outer formation, and I was on the bridge when our weapons officer fired everything we had at a tendril that was reaching for a Terran frigate. Our weapons were primitive compared to Terran technology, but they drew the tendril's attention, and that moment of distraction was enough for the frigate to sever the tendril with a point-blank energy blast. The frigate's captain sent a single word over the channel afterward: thanks. One word, between species separated by 500,000 years, in the middle of a battle at the end of the galaxy. It meant more than any speech. Small contributions, tiny in the scale of the battle, but the Rithon destroyers were doing the same. A Rithon squadron drew fire from a weapon cluster that was targeting a Terran carrier's engine section, absorbing hits that their shields barely survived, buying the carrier time to reposition. The Orani frigates ran interference patterns between the Hollow's interceptor swarms and the Terran supply vessels. A battered Calyx warship, one of the last of its kind, rammed a tendril that was about to pierce the hull of a Terran hospital ship. The Calyx crew evacuated seconds before impact. All survived. The hospital ship and the 4,000 wounded humans inside it survived. Everywhere I looked, beings from a dozen species were fighting for each other. Not because they shared a history, not because they owed each other anything, because they were all standing in the same place, facing the same darkness, and that was enough. The Pale Vigil took critical damage during the compression phase. A stray tendril, severed from the main body by Terran fire, drifted into our formation, and struck our port hull before point defense could react. The impact tore through 2 decks and vented 3 compartments to vacuum. Our shields, already strained from hours of combat, collapsed entirely. Emergency bulkheads sealed. Damage control teams scrambled. Ven, the signals analyst who had stood beside me on the bridge since Seoul, was in one of the vented compartments. She was pulled to safety by a damage control team with 6 seconds to spare. I nearly died. A secondary explosion from a ruptured power conduit threw me across the bridge and into a support strut. I lay there for what felt like a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the alarms and the shouting, and the deep, resonant thud of the Hollow's attacks against the fleet. Then Vassan's voice cut through the noise, ordering me back to my station, and I got up because my commander told me to, and because there was nothing else to do but get up. The funnel tightened. The Terran fleet drove inward, compressing the Hollow's mass, forcing it into a smaller and smaller volume. The casualties were horrendous. Ships fell by the hundreds. The Hollow's interior was a nightmare of thrashing tendrils and gravitational distortions and bioorganic weapons that defied classification. But the formation held. The funnel held. And at the center of the formation, moving with the fleet like the tip of a spear, was the last calculation. Damara stood at her command table, and guided the battle with hands that did not shake and a voice that did not falter. Around her, officers relayed orders and processed data and coordinated the deaths and triumphs of millions of beings. I watched her and understood that this was what she was, not a person who happened to be a commander who happened to be a person, built for this, shaped by 200 years of war and 500,000 years of purpose. She was the point of the spear, and the spear was 4 million ships, and the target was the heart of the thing that ate civilizations. Aegis, Damara said. Protocol Omega status. Cascade weapon charged and ready. Kill zone parameters will be met in approximately 14 minutes at current compression rate. 14 minutes. I gripped my console and watched the battle rage around us, and counted seconds that felt like years. The Hollow seemed to sense what was happening. It fought with increasing desperation, concentrating its mass against the narrowing walls of the funnel, trying to break through. 3 dreadnoughts on the port wall were overwhelmed and consumed. A gap opened, and hollow organisms poured through, heading for open space. Damara did not hesitate. Reserve Group 7, plug the breach. All units, maintain compression. Reserve Group 7, a cluster of 400 warships that had been holding position behind the main formation, surged forward and sealed the gap with a wall of directed energy fire that turned the escaping hollow organisms into vapor. The funnel closed. The compression continued. 8 minutes. The hollow was now confined to a volume roughly the size of a small moon. Its mass was so dense that the gravitational effects were warping the hulls of nearby ships. The creatures at its center were crushed together so tightly that they had begun to merge, losing individual identity and becoming something else. Something unified, something that pulsed with a single, terrible intelligence. 4 minutes. The kill zone parameters flashed green on the tactical display. The cascade weapon, whatever it was ready. All ships, clear the kill zone, Damara ordered. Minimum safe distance, 40,000 kilometers. Execute. The fleet peeled away. Ships that had been pressing inward reversed course and fled outward at maximum acceleration. The funnel dissolved, leaving the compressed hollow mass alone in a sphere of empty space. It immediately began to expand, tendrils reaching outward, organisms separating and spreading. It was too late. Aegis, Damara said. Fire. The cascade weapon launched from the last calculation's ventral bay. It was small. Absurdly small. A cylinder no larger than a shuttle, accelerating toward the center of the hollow mass on a trail of blue-white exhaust. It reached the center and detonated. There was no explosion, no flash, no shockwave. Instead, there was a silence. A spreading sphere of silence that expanded outward from the detonation point at the speed of light. Wherever the silence touched, the hollow stopped. Not died. Stopped. Every organism, every tendril, every cellular process, every neural impulse, simply ceased. The cascade weapon targeted the hollow's distributed neural network, the web of biological signals that connected trillions of organisms into a single mind, and severed every connection simultaneously. It did not kill the individual organisms. It killed the thing that made them one. 4 trillion creatures lost contact with each other in the same instant. The mind that had consumed civilizations, that had devoured species, that had crossed the void between galaxies to feed, that mind went dark. Not slowly, not painfully, just dark, like a light switching off. The organisms drifted, inert, mindless. Individual cells in a body that no longer had a brain. They floated in the void, harmless, empty, already beginning to decay as their biological processes failed, without the coordinating intelligence that had sustained them. The largest living thing in the galaxy died not in fire, but in silence. For a long moment, nothing happened. The fleet held position. Sensors swept the debris field. Aegis ran analysis after analysis, searching for any flicker of neural activity, any sign that the distributed network might reassemble. Nothing. The connections were not just severed, they were gone. The weapon had not merely disrupted the signal. It had erased the pathways themselves, the biological infrastructure that allowed the hollow to function as a unified intelligence. Even if individual organisms somehow survived, they would never reconnect. The mind was dead. Permanently, irrevocably dead. The weapon had worked because Aegis had spent 500,000 years perfecting it. During the First War, Terran scientists had mapped the Hollow's neural architecture in painstaking detail, identifying the specific biological frequencies it used to coordinate across its distributed network. During the dormancy, Aegis had refined the cascade concept through trillions of simulated engagements, testing it against every possible configuration the Hollow might adopt, including consolidation. The weapon had been ready for hundreds of thousands of years. It had simply been waiting for a target. I stood on the bridge of the pale vigil and watched 4 trillion organisms go still, and I wept. Not from grief, not from fear, from something so far beyond either that I did not have a word for it in Telvari or in any language I knew. The battle was over. The Hollow was dead. And the species that killed it had waited 500,000 years for the privilege. The silence stretched, across the fleet, across every species, every ship, every soul that had come to this place expecting to die. The silence stretched. It was not the silence of shock or disbelief. It was the silence of a universe rearranging itself around a truth that had just changed everything. Damara's voice broke it, broadcast on every channel, to every ship, quiet, steady, impossibly tired. All fleets, all vessels. This is Admiral Damara, Terran Strategic Command. The Hollow entity has been neutralized. Neural cascade complete. No regeneration detected. A pause. It is done. You are safe. The Allied channels erupted. I heard Telvari voices screaming in joy. Rethon war chants. Orani prayer harmonics. A dozen species releasing decades of terror in a single, cathartic outpouring of relief that crossed every cultural and linguistic barrier. On the Terran channels, the response was different, quieter. Not celebration, not triumph, something closer to completion. A task finished, a promise kept. I heard crew members murmuring to each other. I heard names being spoken, not the names of the living, the names of the dead. The 40 billion who had died in the First War. The millions who had died today. The hundreds of millions who had given up their lives, their futures, their entire era of existence, to be here. Vasan found me at my console. He looked older than he had when we entered Seoul. We both did. Write it down, he said. Everything you have seen, everything you remember, write it down for the archives. I nodded. I was already composing the entry in my mind. In the hours that followed, the fleet held formation around the remains of the Hollow. Aegis monitored for any sign of regeneration and found none. The cascade had been total. The neural network was not merely damaged, it was erased. The weapon had been designed over 200 years of war, refined during 500,000 years of dormancy, and held in reserve for this single moment. One shot, one chance. And it had worked. The Allied ships began to disperse, carrying word of the victory back to their homeworlds. The Hollow was dead. The nightmare was over. Civilizations that had been hours from extinction would survive. Species that had been preparing for their final stand would see another generation. I stayed aboard the last calculation. Vasan returned to the pale vigil, but I asked permission to remain. I told him it was for research purposes. He knew it was more than that. I found Damara on the observation deck, alone, looking out at the field of dead hollow organisms drifting in the void. She did not look victorious. She looked like a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and had finally set it down. "What happens now?" I asked. She was quiet for a while. "Now we figure out what living looks like," she said. "We have been soldiers for so long that some of us have forgotten how to be anything else. But we will learn. We learned everything else. Will you stay? In the galaxy, I mean. With the rest of us." She looked at me. Those copper eyes, tired and warm and ancient and young all at once. "Where else would we go? Seoul is our home, but the galaxy is our neighborhood. We slept through 500,000 years of it. I would very much like to see what we missed." She smiled then. A real smile, not the tactical expression I had seen during battle. A human smile that carried exhaustion and grief and relief, and a strange, quiet wonder at the fact that she was alive. That any of them were alive. There is so much out there, she said. So many species we have never met. So many worlds we have never seen. We saved our library, you know. Every book, every song, every painting, every recipe, every scientific paper and love letter and bedtime story that humanity ever created. We preserved it all. And now we get to share it. And in return? In return, we get to learn yours. 500,000 years of galactic civilization. Art and music and philosophy and cuisine and architecture and mathematics from species we did not even know would exist when we went to sleep. That is not a price, Kale. That is a gift. I thought about that, about what the galaxy would look like with humanity in it. Not the myth, not the ghost story, the real thing. 900 million people with warships and weapons, and an artificial intelligence that had watched over them for longer than civilizations endured, stepping out into a galaxy that had forgotten they existed. It would change everything. It was already changing everything. I returned to my quarters on the last calculation and began writing my account. This account, every word of it drawn from memory while the memory is fresh, while the images are still burning behind my eyes. The stasis pods opening, the moons cracking apart, the dreadnoughts rising from Earth's oceans, the wall of ships dropping out of hyperspace above my homeworld, the silence as the hollow died. I am writing it for the Telvari archives, for the historical record, for every species that will come after us, and wonder how they got to live in a galaxy without the hollow in it. The answer is simple. The answer is 500,000 years old. Humanity knew the darkness was coming. They knew they were the only ones who could stop it. And instead of moving on, instead of living their lives and leaving the problem to someone else, they chose to wait, in the cold, in the dark, in the silence between stars. They put themselves to sleep and trusted a machine to wake them up, and when the alarm finally rang, they rose and fought and bled and died so that the rest of us could live. That is what they are. That is what they have always been. Not conquerors, not destroyers, guardians, standing watch over a galaxy that forgot to say thank you, because they never needed to hear it. They did not do it for gratitude. They did it because it was the right thing to do. And if the darkness ever comes again, if something emerges from the void between galaxies, in another 500,000 years, I know what they will do. The same thing they have always done. They will be there. My name is Kale Sorrenthi. I am a xenoarchaeology officer of the Telvari Dominion. I came to Sol looking for dead artifacts and found a living miracle. I came looking for weapons and found something far more powerful than any weapon. I found a species that chose to sacrifice its present for someone else's future. A species that looked into the dark and said, "Not on our watch." A species that slept through the rise and fall of civilizations, through the birth and death of stars, through epochs so vast that they made individual lives seem like single breaths in an infinite conversation, and woke up still ready, still willing, still human. Humanity is awake, and this time, they are staying.